Hello, my name is Shannon, and I'm one of the members of the Foster Innovation Lab. There's some really great opportunities for advocacy coming up where foster parents can use your voices and talk to legislators and some others. And so, in preparation for that, we wanted to share some tips for having effective conversations. And these tips come out of both my experience having a lot of different advocacy conversations and in different roles, but also these are some things that have been told to me specifically by leaders and legislators. So as we dive in, let's set the stage. Let's set a foundation. I don't know how many of you have had an experience like this within the foster care system. I know this was a lot what my experience was like, where it's just twisty and turny and hard to predict. And if we think about it, there's a lot of different participants in the system, and they all have their own journey. Most of them, though, are twisty and turny and hard to predict. And so if you are responsible for fixing the system, it's going to look a lot like this. And the reason I say this is I think it's important to start any conversations with a place of understanding and empathy for how complex and confusing it can be. I think when we start from there, we have more effective conversations. So my first tip, after setting that foundation, is to share honestly and vulnerably. You have an important story, you have an important piece of information that you need to share, go for it. But what we want to do is avoid ranting or raging or finger pointing. So I've been told specifically that sometimes it's really hard. A legislator wants to understand the problem, and sometimes it's confusing and difficult when the description of that problem is surrounded by a lot of anger. And so many of you have very good reasons to be angry. I completely understand, but when we're having some of these advocacy conversations, figure out how to tone that in a way that you're both honest about your anger, but it's not confusing the main issue that you're trying to share. One of the best ways to do this is to use I statements. So if you've ever done any therapy or, marriage weekends or anything like that, there's this idea of you speak from a statement about yourself instead of the other person. And so what we want to avoid is sharing identifying or unkind information about someone else who's participating in the system. So an example would be, I feel exhausted and my family is really frustrated. We're not sure if we can continue fostering, especially when we have trouble finding out what is happening with our child's case. That is a different statement than, the social worker never calls me back. I don't know what is wrong with her. She just won't do it. I think she should be fired. So those two statements will start you off on a different foot with whoever you're talking to. The third thing that's important is sharing brief and specific details and using numbers when you can. What we want to avoid is the long form narrative. So we don't want to tell the whole story from beginning to end with all the complexity in between. And we also don't want to use too much jargon because it's not guaranteed that the person you're talking to would know those acronyms or that jargon. So again, here's an example. Let's imagine I have 2 minutes with the legislator. I would love to walk in and say, my foster daughter has been in care for 25 months and in that time has had 5 social workers. She has also never been assigned a CASA, so I'm concerned that no one who can speak for her truly knows her needs. So you're highlighting a couple key things, right? 25 months, really long time in care. 5 social workers, way too many social workers. And to never have a CASA in the middle, this is an illustration of the systemic problem. And this is different than if we walk in and say, my foster daughter moved in right after Christmas in 2013. She was in PIC for 2 months before that and then placed with us. The chipper they gave us was completely inaccurate, and the chet screener, and you can go on and use lots of jargon like PIC and chipper and stuff that is potentially going to confuse the person you're talking to. Which leads me to my next point, which is tie your story to the big picture and know your audience. So for many of us, we are responsible for the little lives, the kiddos in our home, and we are there to advocate on their behalf, and that is incredibly important and valuable. The person we're talking to, however, their job may be to look at the big picture and think about all the different stories they're hearing. And within that, their job is also most likely to be to find the patterns. So the more specific and concise we can be, the easier it will be for them to see some of the patterns and know how they can then use their influence to make a difference. And when I talk about knowing your audience, it's that idea of what is their job. So if you tell them your story today, what do you hope they're going to turn around and do tomorrow? And you want to tie what you're talking about to what they are capable of. We don't want to aim outside of the current topic of discussion. So there's some really big things that are important to us as foster parents, right? Permanency timelines, attachment and the impact that has on child development. These are important things. And it is valuable to talk about them. But if it's outside of what can be done in this moment, it may actually be more distracting and confusing than it is helpful, depending on what that person needs to go do. Okay, quick review. 4 steps to have effective conversations. Share honestly, but limit ranting and blaming. Use I statements and avoid others talking about other system participants. You want to share a brief, specific overview, and you want to tie your specific story to the big picture. And then finally, you want to know your audience. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions or want to know how I drew such a beautifully technical noodle drawing, send us an email at labstaff. Again, my name is Shannon. The email's here, labstaff@fosterinnovationlab.com. Thanks.